Hello, and on the gaming table today, we're taking a look at Strengthen on a Campaign Battle number 3. So once again, we're in the fictional Mithridatic Wars with the forces locally in the area before Sulla got involved. We've got Cares and his Pontic forces who have been successful in the prior two battles, and Livius's Romans who are struggling to overcome the Pontic invasion. Now, here's the battlefield today. If looking from the Roman side here, the Romans in terrain generation managed to get 2 hills in their deployment zone, and they're going to take a very defensive posture today. The only other piece of terrain is a scrubby, boggy area on the Pontic left flank. Now, the auguries boded well for both sides today. They had a lot of command points on their boards. Now, here are the forces, and today we've got a little bit of a different scenario going on. Both sides have to put aside 3 units. They're going to come on as reserves on one of the flank zones on either side of their deployment zone at a certain point in the game. So the Pontic forces put some of their mobile units, their scythe chariots and cavalry, on the left with their weaker unit of phalanx, the ones who had routed from the last game. They put those out as their reserve. Meanwhile, the Romans put their 2 levy legions as well as 1 unit of skirmishers in their reserve, and they have their core of legions and warbands as their on-table force. So with both sides setting up in a little bit more of a condensed line, now that we've got some units coming on later in the game, the Pontic forces have broken down 1 unit of skirmishers onto their phalanxes on the top right of the picture there. The Romans have put their warbands on the left with their cavalry and kept their skirmishers on the right formed up. So here's Cares looking on at the legions, planning how he's going to take them down from this hill here, and Livius looking down from his hill at the Pontic phalanxes. On the first turn, the Pontic forces moved up, mostly in a line, although the skirmishers couldn't get out of the rough terrain. And in response, the Romans moved their skirmishers and cavalry forward, but basically maintained their position on the hill. In the second turn, the Pontic forces addressed their line a little bit more, managed to get their skirmishers up and keep their other units in line. And the Romans responded by forming a nice solid line here, moving the warbands up a little, but they're still supported by the cavalry sitting on that hill to the left. Now, the Pontic forces just moved up a little again. They were waiting for their reserves, and their reserves managed to come on immediately on the, they made the roll, a 3+ roll to come onto the table, and so they deployed on the far right here, putting the mobile units right out on the very right-hand flank, and so here they're obviously looking to swing around and crush the Roman flank. For the Romans, they basically held in place, waiting for their own reserves, which also managed to appear on their far right flank. So the 2 levy legions will come down a little bit more centrally, while the skirmishers will try and get around the Pontic flank. Now, in the Pontic turn, they moved their phalanxes up a little bit more, looking at getting flanked here. They thought maybe we need to engage earlier, and the mobile units on the right flank at the top of the screen managed to start moving. Similarly, the Roman units also started moving up, some of those levy legions being very keen to move forward and get engaged. On the left flank, the Roman cavalry moved out a little. They want to make it a little harder for the Pontic forces to get around their flank. The Pontic forces in the middle formed a nice line. They don't want to advance too far. They want to wait for the Romans to come to them. But on the right, they start charging forward with all speed to try and get around the Roman flank. In the Roman turn, the right flank kept moving up, the rest of the line stayed in place. And in the Pontic turn, the Pontics left their centre, mainly where it was, moved up their flank and managed to get their cavalry turned and ready to flank charge. The Romans in response turned their cavalry to face. That's keeping the cavalry out of the path of the phalanx, but you can still see those scythe chariots way off in the distance there. And then the other Roman units moved forward to start engaging the skirmishers on the left flank of the Pontic line. The Pontic forces began with a couple of bold moves. After moving the chariots up a little, the phalanx charged forward to put itself behind the cavalry. And then the Pontic cavalry charged in, although the Roman cavalry managed to hold firm against this charge. In the centre, the Pontic forces decided that they could outmatch the Romans even on the hill, so they started to push forward in the centre. And then the general's cavalry charged in against the warbands here. They don't even need the phalanx for support here. They've got combat rating 5 against combat rating 4 for the warbands. They managed to drive them back, and although the warbands passed their discipline test, they are now pushed back beyond the line of the legions, so the cavalry doesn't have to worry too much about getting flanked here. So here, as things stand at this point in the battle, with the lines coming together, it looks like the Roman left is in trouble, although the Pontic left is also a little bit open. On the Pontic left, the Romans engage. They're trying to get their legions and skirmishers involved to start cracking into the flank of these phalanxes here. Now, the first attack by the Roman skirmishers here is a grind result. It drives the Pontic skirmishers back into cover, and not only do the Roman skirmishers manage to hold their ground, but in passing their discipline test in an exemplary fashion, they also manage to remove one of their unseen setback cards at the moment. With play passing over to the Pontics, the scythed chariots move up to flank the cavalry, and then the Pontic cavalry charges in, although here that result is defended by the Romans. The general then continues into the warband with his cavalry, manages to give them another setback card, although doesn't manage to drive them back any distance. The first phalanx to engage the legions manages to drive it back, although they pass their discipline so well they get to remove yet one more of their unseen setback cards. That's 2 so far. They're doing well. The phalanx over on the right flank, behind the cavalry there, moves up, still in a position to disrupt that cavalry, but keeping an eye on the warbands off in the distance. And finally, the phalanx on the very left flank here manages to get past the skirmishers, so now it doesn't have to worry too much about getting flanked as long as the Pontic skirmishers can keep things tied up over here. Unfortunately, the Pontic skirmishers don't manage to do that. The Roman skirmishers have a go at them again, driving them back in disorder this time. Livius, with his experienced legion, then follows that up by driving back one of the phalanxes and following up to keep the pressure on. At the left end of the Roman legion line, the legion here tries to turn to charge the cavalry. However, the maneuver is beyond its ability and it fails. Play passes over to the Pontics. The Pontic forces start by trying to beat down this cavalry unit here. Their own cavalry charges in again and manages to disorder them here. They can't run away because of the phalanx behind them. However, they're still in the fight even though they are badly disordered. The scythed chariots then take their turn. Unfortunately, the Roman cavalry resists their attack. Ares, with his companion cavalry, drives the warbands back again, but once again the warbands manage to maintain their discipline. In the centre, the pike phalanxes go against the weaker of the Roman legions on the right. It holds its ground, although it does pick up setback. Similarly, Livius, with his experienced legion, also manages to hold his ground, and even though he's picking up a setback, the Roman line is holding firm. The Thureophoroi try to move up to cover the flank of the phalanx here and keep the line a little bit intact. Unfortunately, they get a bit confused and they don't move forward this turn. And so play passes back to the Romans. The skirmishers over here continue to beat back the Pontic skirmishers and beat them so badly that the skirmishers rout from the table. Livius then follows that up by beating down on one of the phalanxes here. It holds its ground, but it is disordered as a result of the attacks. Unfortunately, the legion on the other side attacks as well, and the phalanx holds its ground even though it's disordered. With not many options left, the Romans try to charge their levy legion around into the flank of the raw phalanx here. However, they fail to pull off the maneuver. On the right flank, once again, the Pontic cavalry is frustrated by the Roman cavalry who defend against their attack. However, the chariots have better luck and manage to drive the cavalry back in confusion. Ares and his companion cavalry keep pushing on the warband. They don't give any more ground, but they are continually picking up setbacks. The phalanx here pushes into Livius and his legion to try and drive them back and give some breathing space to the disordered phalanx beside it. However, Livius and his legion hold their ground. But then the phalanx still manages to pass its role to reform and manages to get back in the fight in good order. Finally, the phalanx on the extreme right moves up to keep some pressure on that cavalry, puts them in a zone of control. It'll make the reform test a little harder if they try and take it. Now at this stage, Chares is looking at the setback pile that the Romans have and decides to call Homunculus S to see if he can fatigue their army. Livius doesn't defend against that. And with 8 points, that is just enough to fatigue the Romans with their break of 16. Now, Livius gets to ditch one of those cards. Now he only has 5 points that are counting towards break, but his army is fatigued. Livius starts by pushing into the Thureophoroi here, manages to drive them back, although they maintain good order. Livius and his legion then push into the next phalanx. Also manage to give it a setback, although it holds its ground. Over on the flank, the skirmishers move and start getting into positions where they can threaten the Pontic left flank. And the cavalry here tries to reform. Unfortunately, they fail and they decide to rout from the field. That picks up a disaster card for the Romans. With play passing to the Pontics, they try to pick on the weaker legions on either side of Livius's more experienced legion. However, on the left, the legion holds firm, and it does on the right as well. The Roman line is being very stoic. Not so the warbands though, as the Pontic cavalry keeps pushing them back, although with their discipline test again rolling double sixes, they get rid of another setback card. That's 3 they've managed to remove so far. For some reason, Caris decides not to follow up with his cavalry. Maybe he wants to build momentum for a new charge. But he does send the Pontic pikes further forward to keep those warbands a little bit occupied. The cavalry and the chariots now manage to turn and are threatening the flank of the Roman legions. And finally, the raw phalanx here has a go at the legions itself. Unfortunately, it is repulsed. Although it passes its discipline test, it does pick up a setback. That's not such a good result. Play passing to the Romans, Livius again drives into the phalanxes here with his experienced legion, pushes them back, gives them another setback. And on the right, the raw phalanx is also driven back. Not only that, it's driven back and exposes its flank to the skirmishers. That makes it disordered immediately, picking up more setbacks. The Roman skirmishers then try some shooting at that phalanx, however, they have no effect. And with the other Roman units on the right flank not deciding to go anywhere this turn, milling about in some confusion, play passes over to the Pontics. Things start well for the Pontics with their horse driving back the warbands, pushing one off the table so it leaves the field and putting the other into disorder. They then try and charge the cavalry into the flank of the Roman legions, however, they fail to make the distance. Play passing to the Romans, the skirmishers here have more shooting into the disordered phalanx in front of them, this time manage to drive them back. The legions then push on the Thureophoroi, giving them a setback, although the Thureophoroi holds their ground. Livius with his experienced legion is heavily engaged in combat once again, driving back another phalanx. And then he looks at the setback pile that the Pontics have and decides it's time to call Homunculus Est. Now, at this stage, the Pontics looking at the Roman pile feel that they're in a good position too, but they don't want to get behind on the Homunculus Est game with their strategy point, so they decide not to spend a strategy point to cancel this. They're going to take the risk. Unfortunately for them, the risk fails. 18 points are revealed, which exceeds their break of 16, and the Pontic forces are broken. Somewhat surprisingly, the Romans only had 13 points of their own, so they probably would have survived a Homunculus Est call had it been made against them by the Pontics. As it is, though, a win for the Romans today. And the skirmishers on the right flank immediately start celebrating, say it was all thanks to them that this was the result from the day. Never mind that the Roman legions were holding very firmly in the middle against the Pontic phalanxes. Now, in the post-battle, even though Caris and his forces have lost this battle, they've been picking up a lot of experience, and so all of their units are now picking up traits and characteristic points. On the Roman side with Livius, he and his raw legion, as well as the boastful skirmishers, managed to pick up some new abilities, although they managed to lose their cavalry, who deserts the field, and the Romans will no longer have mounted troops for the rest of the campaign. To counter this, Livius takes as his characteristic +1 break, so his forces will be harder to break in the future. For Caris, he lost the battle, but only by a little, so his breakpoint drops by 1 to 15. Okay, so that was battle number 3 in the Strength and Honor campaign. Will the Romans have more success in the future? Let's find out in battle number 4. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again real soon.